Pastor Tony Metcalf. I am the associate pastor at the Gathering Church. I'm also the executive director of Churches Embracing Offenders. Using drugs started at the age of 12 with cigarettes. I started out smoking cigarettes and eventually within a couple of years started smoking marijuana. Alcohol came into play there. I drank and smoked weed all through high school. Got into the Navy and stuck to strictly alcohol, but drank alcoholically. When I got out of the Navy, I did pretty much anything I could get my hands on. I got sober in 1997, but I relapsed in 2005. So I've been clean now from drugs and alcohol for a little over 11 years, since August of 2006. Almost from the very beginning, you know. The thing about drug addiction is it's an interesting thing. The thing is that, and the reason I believe that any addict uses is because they have some deep-seated guilt, shame, or fear that they just simply can't deal with, and so they can't cope with that. And what happened was I remember the first time that I drank alcohol, for example, that all that trauma wasn't at the forefront of my mind, right? It was like I wasn't seeking to escape it, but I quickly did, right. And I found something that allowed me to. And you know, when I was drinking, when I was using, I liked who I was, you know. Otherwise I was filled with guilt, shame, and fear. And so you know, chasing that relief is what, you know, it starts out as abuse and quickly turns into addiction. I would say that I was full-blown alcoholic by the age of 17. I know that when I was in the military, that I drank alcoholically every day, drank myself to a blackout, had a number of problems in the military because of my drinking. Well, you know, there's an interesting thing that happens in the brain of an addict. And in addition to allowing us to escape temporarily from the trauma that brought us to the place where we feel like we have to get high, there is a pleasure release as a result of that. Different drugs handle it in a different way. I know that, you know, when I relapsed in 2005, I relapsed on methamphetamine, and that became my drug of choice. That has a very different effect on dopamine production and endorphin production in the brain. So much so that it amplifies their production so much that your brain eventually won't produce those chemicals without the drug. Right. And so, you know, I think that's why it's so hard for people to get off of them, because when they try to abstain, it's impossible to feel good, you know. And so the result of that, you know, being a dopamine addict, someone who is constantly trying to trigger that release and get to that place of comfort or feeling good, we chase it in any way that we can, you know. And even though I've been free of drugs and alcohol for 11 years, I've tried different things. Exercise, you know, I've seen that get abused to the point, you know, for the dopamine and endorphin release on it. Right now my problem is food, you know, and it sounds absurd, but you know, addiction is defined as an uncontrollable craving for more, right? And so what happens when I start eating, as soon as that dopamine is released, I can't stop, you know, and so I have a hard time controlling my food intake. The problem is I can't abstain from that drug or I die, you know, and that makes it even more difficult. Like, I have to eat to live, but when I do, that dopamine is released, and then suddenly my body is craving more and more and more. In 2005, I went from, I quickly became an IV drug user, you know, and I just couldn't get enough was the thing. It's like, and I don't know that, I remember when I quit in 2006, I was at a place where I couldn't stop, and but I couldn't get high either. You know, it didn't matter how much I did, I couldn't get any higher than I already was. But I had been high for so long that I didn't get any effect out of it. Well, I think that I don't think that anybody sets out to become an addict. I don't think it's an intentional thing. It happens, and the thing that people have to look at, the thing I think that everyone is missing, is that this is a response. We're usually self-medicating,
Right.
to try to cope with something that we do not have the coping skills to deal with. Whatever it is that you are ashamed of, that you are afraid of, that you feel guilty about, you have got to talk about that with somebody. You have to keep talking about it until you no longer feel those things. You have to develop the coping mechanisms. Until you can do that, you can't overcome the need to hide, the need to run or escape from whatever demons are chasing you. I promise that you don't have to live that way. I mean, as an addict, I was shooting 7 grams of crystal meth every day. And my life had spun completely out of control, and I felt like I couldn't stop, and for a long time, I did the only thing that I knew how to do. When things got bad, I ran, and that is what I had always done. But you don't have to live like that. I work with a lot of addicts inside the prison now, and the thing that I try to convey to them over and over again is that you have to learn how to do something new. Our best ideas have brought us to the brink of death. The best ideas that we could come up with on our own terms has brought us to a place of near death. Mm-hmm. We have to get to the end of ourselves, to the end of our pride, be willing to take direction from others and follow that direction. Once we do that, once we can get to that place of surrender and understand that we really are powerless, we can't control our addiction, then there's hope for us to recover. And again, I didn't seek drugs and alcohol to escape from that trauma, but what had happened was, and it actually goes back further than that. It goes to some attention-seeking behavior, where I didn't feel like I was getting the attention that I needed at home from my parents. And so I found this other individual that, he took advantage of an ignorant child, of an innocent child. But the thing is I kept going back to that, right? And the problem was, it was a dirty little secret, and you don't tell anybody. So there's guilt in that, and there's shame in that, but also there's fear, because I wasn't the only one. There were 5 other kids in the neighborhood that this was happening with, and we all knew about each other. And there was a fear that somebody was going to tell, right? So you can't imagine the weight and the pressure and just the enormity of that in the mind of a child. Fear that kept me silent, but in shame and guilt, and those are overwhelming things, and I never really developed the coping skills to deal with them. I just tried to repress them until I turned 14 years old. Well, the thing that really has to be looked at is, what is so horribly wrong in your life that you feel like you have to get high? Okay, that's the thing that does not get addressed. And the reason why people continue to relapse. They've experienced some kind of trauma in their life. They are carrying some kind of guilt, shame, or fear that they have not developed the coping skills to process properly. And they have to talk about it. They have to talk about that with someone that they trust, and they have to keep talking about it until they no longer have that guilt, shame, and fear. They have to be able to free themselves of the very thing that they're trying to escape from before they can treat the the need, the physical part of the ailment. Addiction it's a 4-part process, and what happens is we don't often treat all 4 parts of it. There's a physical component of it, which is the uncontrollable craving for more. When I put drugs or alcohol into my body, I have an uncontrollable craving for more, and I can't stop. That's the physical aspect of the disease. It's permanent and irreparable, just like amputation is. But there's also a mental or emotional portion of it. The disease where it resides in the brain, alcoholism and drug addiction, is in the prefrontal cortex, in the limbic system, where emotion is processed. So, when you start using drugs and alcohol, you stop developing emotionally, because you are inhibiting your ability to feel. That's the whole thing. That's the escape. There's also a spiritual component to it. What AA calls being spiritually bankrupt. We have to, in order to recover, have to come to an understanding in a God, something that's bigger than us, that we cannot be the masters of our own lives. When we try to be the masters of our own lives, obviously the thing that happens is addiction. It's consumption, it's compulsion. Whatever it is that we're suffering from is the result of self-will. We have to get outside of our own will and into the will of a benevolent creator that loves us, that wants what's best for us, and be in his will, because we don't want what's best for us. We want to self-destruct. There's also a social component, that you show me your friends and I'll show you your future. We are a product of our environments. Right. And if we continue to hang out in barbershops, we're going to get haircuts, essentially. We're going to assimilate into the culture that we surround ourselves with. So we have to treat addiction as a social problem as well. Right. And we have to treat it on all 4 sides. There's an interesting study done in the 70s where they put a rat in a cage with 2 water bottles, and one was just regular water and the other one had heroin in it. And what happened was the rat kept hitting the bar on the heroin until it died, right? The problem with that study was that rat didn't have anything else to do except hit that bar. Someone else came along a few years later and recreated the study, but he created a ratopia, right? A big playground for a rat. It was like paradise, where he had friends and things to do, and there was all this other cultural stuff going on, and the rat never touched. He tried it, didn't care for it, decided that he wanted to be with his friends doing fun things rather than sitting there making himself sick at that bottle. Yeah. So it's a social disease as well, addiction. We make attempts at it, and we try, but the problem is that drug addicts are so narcissistic, they're so self-consumed, everything is about them, and ultimately, that's the nature of addiction, because they're trying to cope with some kind of inner turmoil, again, that they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with. And so what happens from that is everything is about that next high. Biblically, we would call it idol worship, and the drugs become your idol, where everything that you do, every decision you make, every action that you take is about that next high. It's about that escape. So, everything in their world is about them. If they're not getting something out of it, they're not going to do it. So there are no real relationships. There are hostage situations, essentially. It's affected every relationship that I have, and it took me 17 years of recovery, from the first 8 that I was recovering, and then after my relapse when I got into recovery again. It took me 17 years of working through these problems to to really figure out that the problem was never that I was abused as a child. That was because I kept going back to that. That was the problem. That I found some kind of sick, twisted acceptance in that I was, some kind of attention that I wasn't getting elsewhere. The problem, the real problem for me was the attention-seeking behavior. It was feeling like I had to compete and fight for my father's love. And so until I could really get to the bottom of that and figure out that I suffered from this, I couldn't really learn to have a relationship, a meaningful relationship with anyone, because I kept competing for other people's attention. Right? I had to figure out really who I was before I was capable of having and sustaining a healthy relationship with anyone else. And that took some doing and some work. And
what did you do to make that money?
Yeah, I dealt drugs like a lot of people do. Meth addicts especially become drug dealers in order to support their habit, or manufacturers in order to support their habit. I did sell drugs. I also I was more into the financial crimes aspect of it. It was easier for me to do that, so I manufactured fake IDs and fake checks, and we would go out and rip Walmart off for $10,000 a day and turn around and then spend that on drugs. There was never anything to show for it. That's an interesting thing, because for as long as I've been doing this recovery thing and working inside the prisons, doing recovery in the prisons with the inmates, and all the time that I used and all the time that I've been in recovery, I've never met a successful drug dealer. I have never met a drug dealer that could make a successful living at it or had anything to show for the work that he had put in. Mm-hmm. It was all temporary. Like, it all falls apart so fast. Everything that you accumulate, it's gone in a moment. The prosecutor and I sat down one day and we figured out what a drug dealer makes over the course of a lifetime, and it came out to like $3.77 an hour. By the time you figured in state pay and lost wages for incarceration and all these other things that come along with that lifestyle and that career path, sure, you might make some fast money, but it always ends the same. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets caught. You're going to go to jail, and you're going to spend more time down than you are up. And when it all washes out in the end, you didn't make anything. But they did seize all of my assets when I wasn't arrested for dealing.
Right.
So they don't have any perception of that. What they had me on were paper crimes, again, forgery and counterfeiting. For the checks and the IDs, they seized all of my assets. They took everything that I had. I had to start over from nothing. I mean, literally from the clothes on my back, and still paying back taxes, on that I did, where I just wasn't able to file because of my incarceration, or there are a lot of repercussions that came along with it. There's fines and costs, and I had managed to accumulate 21 felonies in 4 counties in the 16 months that I was out, that I had relapsed. And so there was tens of thousands of dollars in fines and probation fees and court costs and all these things that you're trying to do, along with the burden of being a convicted felon, making it difficult to find a job, making it difficult to find a place to live, that was affordable. So it's kind of a difficult system to navigate. It's why I do the work that I do now, because I did figure out how to navigate that system. It's not impossible. I want people to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's really not a train. Well, I had the same teeth problems that everybody else has, and had quite a bit of extensive dental work had to be done. When I came into recovery in 1997, my drug of choice was alcohol, and I was drinking myself to death. I was jaundiced, and my liver was swelled up 1.5 times its normal size. So, kind of looked like I was carrying a volleyball around in my side. And that took years for that to recover. I still suffer the effects of the chronic meth use, and that I don't have the short-term memory that I used to have. I have a really difficult time holding thoughts together. There's just a lot of short-circuiting that goes on up there. I've kind of learned to work around it and work through it, but I still have issues, and it's a struggle, for me. If I'm not, I have to, whatever I'm doing, whatever task I'm at requires 100% concentration, and I can only do one thing at a time. If I get distracted from it, I lose where I'm at, and I've got to start over. I got arrested, and I knew that I wasn't going to get out. I knew I had some time, and I could either let that consume me, or I could use it to my advantage. So I pursued my recovery. I got re-engaged. I got into the literature, NA, AA. I started going to all of the meetings that I could. I did the therapeutic program up at Branchville while I was up there, and I did their outpatient program while I was up there, and I took in everything that I could, trying to prepare myself for when I was released, so that I could re-engage in my recovery and not pick up where I left off, but do it right this time. Well, it's a combination of things. Treatment really only serves three purposes. It is to detox you, to educate you, and to introduce you to a 12-step program. That's all treatment is for. Now, the problem that we have here, our longest program is 28 days. You can't really treat meth and heroin addiction in a 28-day program because it takes at least 90 days before your brain will even produce endorphins again, or dopamine, right? So it's impossible to feel it. You're not even completely withdrawn from the effects of the drugs for 90 days. So there are long-term programs that are outside of our community, like Teen Challenge down in Dixon, Kentucky, or the Lighthouse in Washington, that have a better success rate. But essentially, all treatment is there for is to detox you, to educate you, and to introduce you to a program that will allow you to continue in your recovery. Okay. So whatever that is, whether it's AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, you have to find some continuing aftercare program, and you have to maintain that program in order to sustain your recovery. Alcoholics Anonymous says that we are granted a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition.
Right.
And so each person has to maintain that spiritual condition in order to maintain any sort of recovery. Excuse me. When you take something as big as addiction, what is an idol in people's lives? The first step says that we are powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, and that our lives have become unmanageable. Well, powerless indicates that it is a power greater than us. It's a false power. It doesn't work. But when we take that out of our lives, it's such a huge part of our lives that it has to be replaced with something. The choice is whether to replace it with something good and healthy or something else that is bad. A lot of people choose the bad. They switch up their addictions, whatever that may be. I mean, it can go to shopping or gambling or sexual addictions or whatever. Or you can replace it with recovery.
Okay.
Recovery is an everyday thing that goes on, that you have to do for the rest of your life. But it's not a burden, it just becomes a way of life.